So today we're talking about the healing method of Jesus. And there's not just one method, there's several. We'll look at them all. But this is part 5 of the voice of the mystic. This is thinking of Jesus as a mystic. It's a word that a lot of people are not comfortable with. I've talked about this before. And, I've always been comfortable with it because I've never heard it in a negative way until I learned it in a positive way. And then when I heard it in a negative way, that guy, Tesla, you know, the guy that, what's his first name?
Elon?
No, the original Tesla guy.
Nikolai.
Nikolai? Yeah. He invented a little remote control boat. And did I tell this story? And he had his little controls, and he was at a World Fair, and nobody knew what remote control was. But he told the audience, and he had a pretty big audience, he told them that there were little people inside that boat, and if they would call out a command, the little people would make the boat do circles or, you know, go right or left or whatever. And so the people did this, called out commands. They were all just dumbfounded by the fact that these little men, you know, what is this? But they totally bought it. They totally believed it, and he couldn't let it go. He had to show them what he was doing, and of course nobody knew what that was. But they accused him of being a mystic. He was a crazy left, I don't know, I mean, just out there. He was a mystic. So you hear a lot of that kind of association, or mystery. If you do some research on the mystery schools, you know, the ancient mystery schools, there's all kinds of stuff around mystic and mystery. But my initial exposure to the word was a positive one, so I've always had a positive feeling about it. And I like it. I like what it means. I like what I mean when I say it, you know. But I realize that not everybody does. Evelyn Underhill wrote a book called Mysticism, and it's one of the classics, you know, that talks about it. It's very difficult to get through. It's a very hard read because she takes a very academic approach to the subject, but she quotes a lot of people, you know, a lot of mystics that I'd never even heard of, but does a wonderful thing. But she started getting mail and stuff about, why do you use that word? You know, why do you use that term? And I mean, it goes way back. The whole idea of mysticism goes way back. But again, it's just associated with weird stuff a lot of times. So, you know, conjuring up the dead. If you go back into the Old Testament, you'll see that one of the prophets is conjured up from the dead, you know, and it's magic and all this stuff around that. So it has kind of a negative connotation, but it doesn't, to me, it never has, and I hope that we can get over that. And you probably don't have that problem, but I realize some people do, especially when you're talking about Christianity. But what is very interesting about that is Christianity has an extremely strong mystical thread through it. There's a lot of, what's that guy, you told me about him. He travels all over the country now. He's from Texas. He's a friar. He's some kind of a...
Richard
Rohr, yeah, Richard Rohr. Pick him up sometime on YouTube. You know, his stuff is really good, and he's a Catholic. You know, he's a Catholic priest. But that strain is in Christianity, but you will not ever see it in a fundamental church, in a Christian fundamentalist church, which is very unfortunate. I won't say we'll never see it. We might someday. But the reason we don't is because it goes against the paradigm. Mysticism says go within. The traditional Christian paradigm says it's coming from without. You know, God's up there someplace and the kingdom's coming someday. It's all outer oriented. The mystic is from the inside out. The traditionalist is from the outside in. Religion is from the outside in. Many mystics don't have religions. They are in religions, And, like the Christian mystics, they all operated within the system, but they were saying something very different from the mainstream. And some of them, like Meister Eckhart, for example, was attacked by the church. He was banned. He was that Meister? I think it was Meister Eckhart. He died before he was actually convicted of being a heretic. But then many years later, like now, you go on the internet, he's all over the place. We love him. He's in many books. He's in my books. He's all over the place. But he was considered a heretic. Madame Guyon, another one, a French mystic, considered a heretic. She was imprisoned for 7 years, poisoned by the church. They tried to assassinate her. And you read her little book on prayer, and it could be written by a Unity minister. She has some terms, that she uses. That her term for the mystical awakening is a wound. I was wounded so deeply, I wish it had never quit. She'd talk like that, and that would seem confusing, but she's not talking about a wound like we think of wound. She's talking about her soul is moved to the point where she will never be the same. That's the spiritual awakening. And I keep going back to the near-death experience. That's what happens to these people. They pass into a realm of reality that they can't unsee. They'll never be the same after going through this. And it's so the two things are not separate. It's just that we're approaching them from a different way. I don't want to get hit by the classic garbage truck to have a mystical experience, but they do. That's what happens. And but the mystic, that's the plus side. It seems like your spiritual journey is going slow. It's going rough. It's hard to be still. It's hard to do all this stuff. But if you have an instant awakening, like a near-death experience, or even a mystical experience, it's going to take you a while to figure that out and to figure out what to do with your life. And the researchers say it takes 7 years for an NDEer to get their bearings again. Now they're saying 7 to 20 years. I'm reading some new research on this, that people are struggling with it. Some of them can't give up the idea of suicide because they want to get back home. They want to get back to what they've seen. So the advantage of your seemingly slow progress is that you work yourself into it. It's not just suddenly you have it, suddenly it's all there. It is a gradual thing, and that seems frustrating, but most things we learn, we do it in stages. We do it a little at a time. That's what I was listening to one of these YouTube guys, and he was saying, if you start a YouTube channel and you expect it to blow up instantly, and it doesn't, you're going to get very discouraged. And he said most people don't. It doesn't. You've got to stay with it. But it's true with this whole thing. Why do we keep coming back to this kind of thought? Especially when maybe you don't have any mystical insights. Maybe you don't have any direct revelations from God. But there's something in you that does not let you leave this path. And that something is the voice of God. It's just speaking at a level that's probably healthiest at this point. Because if it turned the volume up all of a sudden, and just blows your mind, you don't know what to do with your life now as it is. Because what you see is so beautiful that everything else looks drab. That's what, what's the psychiatrist, not Freud, but the other one. Carl Jung. He had a near-death experience. He couldn't hardly come back. He didn't want to come back. He just said, I've got to come back to that little box, in this drab world. He said, it took me a long time to decide I will come back. But he couldn't eat. He said he'd look out the window. It looked like a cardboard cutout, he's just very drab. So it takes people a while to get over that and to say, I'm here. This is not near as cool as where I was just now, but I'm here for a reason, and I'm going to make the best of it. And what's interesting about it is we start getting the idea that it's not that long. No matter how long we're here, it's not that long. you consider yourself an eternal being, this is kind of a flash in the pan. Some days it seems forever, but it's not. It never is. And you look back at your life and you look back at some of the things you see that seem so long ago, but here you are today. So when we check out, it'll seem like it just didn't take that long, to get here. Okay? One outstanding feature of the ministry of Jesus was its healing aspect. And many followed him, and he healed them all. Matthew 12:15. Well, we're given the impression that he healed by the hundreds, and even maybe the thousands, you get that sense. Indications of the methods he used can give us some practical insight toward our own healing needs. You always have to take that with a grain of salt. When it talks about Jesus going out and you get the impression there's just thousands of people, he healed them all. And that just doesn't happen. You just don't see that kind of thing happen, even with faith healers, that even the fraudulent ones don't have that good a success. But you just have to put that in perspective. The writers are making him into this great healer. I totally believe he was a healer. I think that was absolutely one thing he did. But I think it's different than we probably think. I don't think he was born knowing he was a healer. I think he learned as he went into his ministry and as he saw people respond to him that he was that healing dynamic. He started to understand it, how it worked, and he started to put himself in the position where people would be healed. And we can't, again, we just don't know enough about each individual case to really describe what happened, but we only go by what we have. But one of the first things that comes to mind is, in some cases, he simply spoke the word of healing with such authority that the person responded. Healing affirmations grounded in the understanding that the soul is now whole, and this wholeness reflects in the body, can play an important role. Charles Fillmore was real big on the power of the spoken word. And if you will talk to yourself, like your time of quiet, if you can't get your mind still, write out a couple of affirmations. If you're having a healing issue, if you're having some kind of personal challenge, if you'll write out things to say, like I am now whole, the spirit, the wholeness of God is now expressing through me, just anything that gets you in that frame of mind. And you say that aloud, and it can be in a whisper. Just speak it, just so you hear yourself say it. That's a pretty powerful thing. It's a very focusing thing because you're hearing your own voice and you are hearing something you want to agree with. And there's no magic to it, but it sets up a vibration, I think. It's what it is, some kind of vibration. But, when Jesus, the example I use all the time, when he came to the guy by the pool of Bethesda, there for 38 years, he just spoke the word. He spoke a word. Do you want to be healed? He didn't say, be healed, but he did say, take up your pallet and walk, but he asked the question first. And so that question is the opening of the mind to the spoken word, the power of the spoken word. I would love to know more about that story. I'd love to, be the fly on the wall that saw that happen. But we've seen even in the televangelists, the faith healers kind of people, that they will speak with such force sometimes that you're going to be healed or you're afraid you're going to die, afraid of the guy. And we don't want that kind. We want just a spoken word that speaks the truth of what it is we want to experience. And I think that goes a long way, and I think he understood that. I don't think he always understood it, but I think he learned to understand how powerful that was, how powerful the spoken word was. And if you think in your own life, if you were hurt by somebody that said something, that's the power of the spoken word. And so you took that in somehow, and so what if you take the positive word in, the power of the positive word, You take that in instead. And that's one way to help deal with a wound, that you have received you think you've received from somebody else, is begin to say something like that. Those words have no power over me. I'm free. I rise above it now. Anything to get yourself out of that energy. That's all it is. We're changing the energy. And our words change energy because they are energy. And they're coming out of the depth of our being. So the power of the spoken word is one way. If you got something going on, think about that. You can speak words out loud. Driving down the road in your car, talk to yourself. You probably do anyway, but don't talk to that guy that pulled out in front of you. Talk to yourself. The healing touch. This is one I don't think he understood he had, especially with the woman that touched the hem of his garment. There were times when Jesus simply touched a person or they touched him and the healing occurred. In the case of a leper, this would be especially significant since it was believed that physical contact increased the chances of contracting the disease. This indicates that Jesus did not see disease as a power, but as an effect, subject to the true power of God within. And I've thought about that. We don't have lepers, that's not something that we normally think about except through the Bible and stuff. But it was a big deal, apparently, back then. The untouchables, you don't touch them. So you can imagine the power of a guy going up and touching a leper, and saying, be healed. That in itself, just the courage to do that and him showing himself as unafraid. The idea of the woman touching the hem of his garment says that he felt the power go out of him. That's probably an addition. It's probably not something that happened, I'm guessing, because it doesn't have to. The power would be in her mind, in her thought, in her expectation. If I can just touch even the hem of his garment, I'll be whole. He obviously had a reputation that preceded him. That was part of the thing, when Jesus sent out the 70 disciples to do ministry. What I think he was doing was sending people out to spread some talking points and get them ready, for his visit. And he would say, if you find a city that rejects you, what you're saying, kick the dust off your sandals. We won't go there. But if you find one that's receptive, then we'll book that one. We'll set up there. So he'd go there because people would be receptive. So that tells us part of the healing is like in the woman that touched his garment, where is the power of faith? Or where is the power of healing? It was in her faith. And that's going to be another one here we'll talk about. But that's the idea of healing by touch. We talk about bedside manner with physicians. It's very important. Beth and I were talking to a doctor the other day and just immediately liked the guy. He just had a real good manner about him. And I have talked to other doctors. I went to an ENT one time that he was colder than my refrigerator icebox. Just like, but, so there's a difference in how you feel about them and if you're open to what they do or what they recommend or not. Another one is meditation and prayer. Maintaining a God consciousness through meditation and prayer was probably his greatest healing asset. He obviously had a first-hand awareness of God, which means he would see God in all people. Prayer was the calling forth of the God potential within those he encountered. So there are several passages that says he goes off, by himself in the wilderness or whatever to a lonely place to pray. The Gospels say to pray. I would say probably meditate. Probably more meditation, less words, more stillness, more openness. If he was half as busy as it makes him sound, and I'm sure he was, he would want to get away from everybody to regain that contact, to get that feeling of unity with God again. because you can get out in the busy world and lose that. And especially in our world, we have so many electronic distractions and trying to make YouTube programs happen and all that stuff. You can get very shallow, just in what we have going on every day. So I think if I was going to say what was his greatest healing asset, his greatest secret to healing, I would say it's centering prayer, going off alone and becoming still, reconnecting with that conscious union with the absolute. That's what it amounts to. So that's very important, which means all these I'm talking about are important for all of us. They're tools we can use in our daily life. And that becoming still, that's a powerful one, because I have found myself, there's a storm going on up here, and I have found myself in the middle of that storm able to sit down and release that just by simple, I now let go. I'll talk to myself. I now let this go. I don't need this. And how many times have you been here? You can go into a little conversation about it, but it doesn't resolve anything to be that hamster running on the wheel. You get off, as I said in one of my talks, you get off in the same place you got on. It doesn't accomplish one thing. So you sit down to let that go, and you're letting go because your body gives up that tension, and you feel it in your body. And that's pretty powerful. So meditation and prayer, we all know about that. Then here's the faith factor. Your faith has made you whole. In many cases, he attributed the faith of a person healed as the true source of the healing power. Faith is expectation. Those who shifted from doubt to high expectancy moved into the condition of wholeness. I have always liked that. Instead of the word faith, because that conjures up a lot of old-fashioned ideas, just think of it as expectation. Where's your faith? What faith are you? You ask somebody out in the elevator, they'll tell you, I'm Methodist, I'm Catholic, I'm whatever. But if you say, where is your faith? That's a whole different thing. That's a whole different question. So where is your expectation? Right now in this moment, where is your expectation? That's a very simple question to ask, but if you can answer it and you can change it, because if your expectation is in something you don't want, you change that view, you change that direction that your faith faculty is pointing. And actually faith and imagination work hand in hand. You really can't separate the two. Because when you're expecting something bad, you're going to imagine all of it. It's going to run like a movie through your brain, and it's that visualization is very important to monitor. The things you think are working against you, most of the time that's the work of the imagination, working off some past information. You think something's not working, you think, nobody's watching my YouTube channel, so that everybody must hate me. You can get into a thing like that, and I'm not saying I'm doing that, but I would ask, does anybody care about this message? Does this really matter? You have all these kinds of questions, and then something changes, and it changes that whole line of thought. But it's better to change that line of thought before the thing comes up, because that line of thought, negative line of thought, is expectation. It's like, why isn't this working? That's an expectation. How can I make this work better? Why am I not getting along with this person? That's expectation. It would be better to say, whatever it is that's between us is now dissolved. To look at it in a more positive way, to speak a word that will help dissolve that perception, that negative energy. Because that perception is expectation. It's your faith. Where's your faith directed? And again, that's why we like to separate religion from the spiritual path. Because you ask somebody, what's your faith? They'll tell you, the denomination that they belong to. Has nothing to do with their expectation. Except, I'm saved and I expect to go to heaven. but that may not help in your financial crisis right now or your health challenge or whatever. Where is your faith now? Where is your expectation now? So that's, and that was, I don't know how many cases, I looked that up one time. There were 6 or 7, I think, cases in the Gospels where it said, he says, your faith has made you whole. That is an extremely powerful statement, because he's saying, it's not me. I'm not doing it. I'm not, probably not this Messiah you think I am. You are. The one you're waiting for is you. Your faith, not my faith, has made you whole. You meditate on that. My faith is what makes me whole. So what's that problem I have in my life? Where's my expectation? And can I turn my faith into a solution in a direction where I embrace my wholeness? That's the real interesting point. Because to me, that's a great confirmation. Your faith has made you whole. He's said that a number of times. Then the placebo effect. I found several pictures of people with mud in their eye, but they're all kind of gross. So I got one with mud around the eye. Another interesting healing tool was that of the placebo, in his case, mud. Does mud have any healing qualities? Well, some people think it does. Probably not, but the belief that it does brought about change in some cases. Perhaps such an attitude can justify medications that help increase our faith. So I think I've told you that doctor that I didn't care for, the ENT, I was having throat issues, sore throat, and my imagination was going crazy. And so I go see this guy, and in 10 minutes probably, I was in his office. He had just stuck a stick down my throat and said, you just have an allergy. And the sore throat I was experiencing for several months was gone by that afternoon, because his words, made a difference, made an impact. You don't have to like a guy to be healed by him, That's one of the good things. But in a sense, that's the placebo effect. You go to the doctor because you think your expectation is he's going to help or she is going to help. And I'd been putting that off, because it's like my cousin, who's now passed away, but she said she didn't want to get her oil checked because it might be empty. It was like, okay. But I still remember that. She's younger than I am when she said that. But the expectation thing, if we can get that turned around, if it takes the placebo to do it, there's nothing really wrong with that. And I was reading an article about the placebo effect, and it's not anything anybody laughs at. It's a real thing. And so, they do these studies, and they give somebody sugar pills, and they give others the actual medication, and a lot of times the sugar pills do just fine, but until they find out they're sugar pills. It's like that kid I saw years ago. I told you this, I know, but he had training wheels on his bike, and they weren't touching the ground. It's like he could actually ride the bike, but he didn't know it. But I bet you if he took the training wheels off, he wouldn't be able to ride it, because his expectation, his faith was in those training wheels. But really, the power of riding the bike was in him. And that's what it comes down to us. But so what if the placebo helps us get past the appearance? There's nothing wrong with somebody rubbing mud in your eyes if you think it's going to work. I don't particularly think it will. But just think about that. What is the power of spitting into a handful of dirt and making mud out of it and packing it in somebody's eyes? And then say, go wash your eyes, go wash your face, and report to the priest, and you can see. There's a lot of faith in that placebo. But the placebo just gets the expectation going in the right direction. So it's not a bad thing, necessarily. So if the medication you're on is, you feel like it's working, and that's why we don't talk about, is it right or wrong to take medication? my aunt and was a Christian Scientist, and they never would do that, never would even think about going to a doctor. But Audrey was telling me the other day, our daughter was telling me about a Christian Scientist nurse that she thought was a very interesting combination because they don't generally, go that direction. Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, said you can't have a headache because you don't really have a head. You're a spirit. You're a soul. And that's pretty extreme. I'll take an aspirin first, thank you. The final one is the forgiveness of sin, and this is a huge one. The final healing element is the forgiveness of sin. Some who associated sin with disease were healed the moment they believed they were free of the scourge of sin. I think Jesus, the soul as totally free of the consequence of sin. I think he saw the soul. I missed a word there. I think Jesus saw the soul as totally free of the consequence of sin. He was not forgiving sin. He recognized the person was already free of sin. He would say this, and people would, the Pharisees in particular, would say, you can't do that. You can't say that. Only God can forgive sins. What I think Jesus came to in his times of quiet was this whole sin thing is man-made. It's made up. He didn't make a dime off forgiving sins, but now we have booths, that we can do that, and that's probably a pretty good source of income, if I were guessing, the confessional booth. And again, it's probably the placebo thing, or the idea of sharing with somebody that you get off your chest, and that very powerful thing. But in the book I'm working on, that's one of the areas I deal with is sin. What is that? Are we born into sin as Scripture tells us? We are. And that started with Adam and Eve. And then it goes on, Paul was big on it, and several people. You take sin away from that system and it doesn't work. So you got to have sin. So we're all born in sin. We're just natural. It's a job security, for the ones that are promoting it. But Jesus, I think, said in himself, that's not true. The soul is totally free of sin, always. Yes, we may do things that are wrong. We may do things that are problematic. We may break the law, and we may have to suffer consequences as a result of that. But what about the soul? And see, what hangs over our head is if you die a sinner and you're not saved, you're going to go to hell. So what if that's not true? And I think he came to that realization, that kind of thinking is not true. So he would see somebody that was sick. Everybody was saying, this guy sinned, did something. Who sinned? This man or his parents, that he was born blind. They associate sin with disease. So he comes up and says, that has nothing to do with this guy's case. Because he's not bound by sin. He's bound by the belief in sin, the power of belief. And that's a whole different thing, because we can do something about that. So that's something to think about. I was steeped in that. It just goes without saying, you're born in sin. It's part of who you are because you're a human being. And that is a very powerful message. And it's an even more powerful message to give up, to let go, because it's just not true. So any one of these healing elements may represent a tool we can apply to our own healing need. Does that give you something to think about? As if you haven't been thinking about it already, but it's just, I thought it was an interesting subject. What were the healing methods of Jesus? Let's pull them out. And so I pulled out, there's probably a few more in there someplace, but these are the main ones. All right? Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Thanks again for your interest in independent unity, and have a wonderful week.